The lock on the Alpha's private study picked easier than I expected. That was my first mistake. My second was thinking I could steal the contract and leave before his meeting ended. My third, turning around to find Damon leaning against the doorframe, sleeves rolled up, watching me with eyes that burned like molten gold. I stopped breathing. My back hit the mahogany desk, knocking over a crystal tumbler of whiskey. The sound shattered the silence, but he didn't flinch. He didn't growl. He didn't shout. He just clicked the lock shut behind him. "You have nimble fingers, little thief," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and settled heavy in my stomach. He took a step toward me, then another. Let's see if they're just as skilled when they're trembling. I should have run. I should have shifted and jumped through the window. But the scent of him, rainwater, cedar, and pure unadulterated dominance, pinned me to the spot harder than any chain. He planted his hands on the desk on either side of my hips, trapping me in a cage of muscle and heat. He leaned down until his lips brushed the shell of my ear. "You broke into my sanctuary," he whispered, his hot breath sending shivers down my spine. "Now, you belong to the room." Welcome back to Storm's Werewolf Romance Library. If that intro made your pulse spike, you are exactly where you belong. We are diving deep into a story of reckless choices and possessive alphas today, and I cannot wait to read the comments on this one. Before we let the alpha claim his prize, I need a favor from you. We are growing so fast, and I need a name for this family. The Pack? Is the Night Shift? The Storm Chasers? Drop your best idea for our community name in the comments below. I'll pick the best one next week. While you're down there, tell me where you're listening from tonight. Are you tucking in for bed in London? Driving to work in New York? Or maybe hiding in the break room in Sydney? Go ahead and hit that like button to feed the algorithm. Subscribe if you haven't already, and consider joining our channel membership for exclusive ad-free extended cuts. Now take a deep breath. Let the tension settle in your chest. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Sound of Breaking Bone. The sound of impact was sickeningly wet, a dense crunch that echoed louder than the string quartet playing in the corner of the ballroom. It wasn't the dry snap of a twig, but the horrifying noise of cartilage giving way under force. And my knuckles screamed in immediate protest, a sharp flare of pain shooting all the way up my forearm to my shoulder. But I couldn't focus on my throbbing hand. I couldn't focus on the music that had just died in the throat of the cello, or the hundreds of collective gasps that sucked the oxygen out of the gilded hall. I could only stare, paralyzed by the enormity of my mistake, at the man standing before me. Damon, the Alpha King, the apex of our entire species, stood frozen, with his head turned sharply to the side, following the momentum of my right hook. Silence descended like a heavy curtain. It was absolute, terrifying, and suffocating. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, desperate to break its cage. My wolf whimpering in the back of my mind to run, to flee, to submit, to do anything but stand here. I was an unranked Omega, a baker who spent her days kneading dough and hiding from the politics of the pack, and he was a creature of myth and violence. When he had cornered me near the champagne tower, demanding a submission I wasn't willing to give simply because he was bored and powerful, my body had reacted before my brain could catch up. I expected death. I expected him to tear me apart, right here on the polished marble floor. Damon didn't roar. He didn't shift into the massive beast that haunted the nightmares of our enemies. Instead, he lifted a hand, his movements slow and terrifyingly controlled. His fingers, thick and calloused, brushed against his upper lip. He pulled his hand away and looked at the red smear on his skin, the bright crimson stark against his complexion. Then he slowly turned his head back to face me. His nose, usually straight and perfect, like a marble statue carved by the ancients, was crooked, violently crooked. A steady stream of dark blood flowed from one nostril, trailing over the harsh curve of his lip and dripping onto the pristine white collar of his dress shirt. The word died in my throat, strangled by fear. My voice was small, shaking so hard it was barely audible. I told you to let go. The crowd around us shifted. A sea of velvet and silk recoiling from the blast zone. I could feel their eyes, hundreds of them, burning into my skin. They were waiting for the violence. They were waiting for the execution. But as I looked up, trembling, I didn't find rage in his eyes. I found gold, molten burning gold that seemed to glow from within. He brought his thumb to his mouth and licked the blood away with a slow, a deliberate stripe of his tongue. And then he smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a predator's grin, sharp and full of white teeth, promising things that made my knees weak for all the wrong reasons. The air between us grew heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. Finally, he rumbled, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated through the floorboards, traveling up my legs and settling heavily in my stomach. A challenge. He ignored the royal guards rushing toward us, his gaze never leaving mine. He stepped forward, invading my personal space until the scent of him, rainwater, cedar, and something undeniably masculine like worn leather, flooded my senses. He reached out, not to strike, but to capture. His large hand engulfed my bruised fist, lifting it to his mouth. He pressed a kiss to my sore knuckles, his lips warm and soft against the violence I had inflicted. You just started a war, little wolf, he whispered against my skin, the vibration of his words traveling straight to my core. And I intend to win. Chapter 2. The King's Bed. The drive to his estate was silent, but it wasn't peaceful. I sat in the passenger seat of his sleek black coupe, the leather cool against my bare arms, while the heater blasted warm air that smelled faintly of him. Damon drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually on the gear shift. Every time he shifted gears, his arm flexed, the fabric of his suit straining against the corded muscle beneath. I hated that I noticed. I hated that my wolf was currently curling up inside my chest, purring like a traitor, simply because we were in his enclosed space. The windows were tinted dark, shielding us from the world, creating a private bubble where the only thing that existed was his overwhelming presence. "Stop thinking so loud," Damon said, his voice cutting through the thick atmosphere. He didn't look at me, keeping his eyes on the winding mountain road that led to the peaks where only the elite lived. "I can hear the gears turning. You're trying to calculate an escape route." I crossed my arms over my chest, trying to preserve some warmth, some dignity. "It's not a calculation. It's a necessity. You kidnapped me." "I escorted you," he corrected, his tone maddeningly calm. "It would have been a kidnapping if I threw you in the trunk. You walked to the car. Hesitantly, perhaps, but you walked." "Because you growled at the valet," I snapped, the adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion. "He was looking at your legs," Damon said, his grip on the steering wheel tightening until his knuckles turned white. "He's lucky I only growled. You are under my protection now, Mina. That means no one looks, no one touches, and no one disrespects you, including me." We pulled up to a massive iron gate that swung open automatically, revealing a sprawling estate that looked more like a modern fortress than a home. Stone walls, high towers, and floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked the valley below. He parked the car and led me inside, his hand hovering at the small of my back but never quite touching. A ghost of heat that guided me through the grand foyer and up the winding staircase. The house was empty, silent, devoid of the usual staff that bustled around high-ranking pack members. "Where is everyone?" I asked, at my voice echoing in the hallway. "Holiday," he said shortly, opening a set of double doors. "I gave the staff the week off. It's just us." He led me into the master suite, A room so offensive in its luxury that I almost turned around. A fire roared in the hearth, and in the center of the room sat a bed large enough to sleep a small army. "I'm sleeping in a guest room," I announced, planting my feet. Damon began taking off his jacket, tossing it onto a velvet chair. He started on his cufflinks, his movements fluid and unbothered. "We don't have guest rooms prepared. The sheets are dusty. The heat is off in that wing. This is the only room with fresh linens. You have a castle, you have 50 rooms, and only one has me in it," he said, meeting my eyes with a challenge. "I promise, on my honor as king, I will not touch you unless you ask me to. But I am a wolf, Mina. I don't sleep well when my pack is scattered. You are here. You are safe. Get in the bed." I should have fought him. I should have slept on the rug. But I was so tired, and the bed looked like a cloud. I climbed in, staying as close to the edge as possible, fully clothed in my gala dress. Damon stripped down to his boxer briefs with zero shame, revealing a landscape of muscle and scars that told the history of his reign. He slid into the other side, turning off the lamp. The darkness was absolute. I lay there for an hour, listening to his breathing slow. Just as I started to drift off, I felt the mattress dip. An arm, heavy and warm, and solid like a steel band, draped over my waist. He pulled me backward until my back was pressed flush against his chest, his chin resting on the top of my head. I froze. "You said you wouldn't touch me," I murmured sleepily, too exhausted to shove him away. "I lied," he whispered into my hair. "I'm a greedy bastard. Go to sleep." I woke up hours later, in the dead of night. The room was pitch black, save for the dying embers of the fire. I shifted, realizing I was practically on top of him, my leg thrown over his hip. I froze, horrified, and looked up. Damon was awake. He was staring at me in the dark, his eyes glowing with that terrifying, beautiful gold light. He wasn't sleeping. He was watching me. "Run if you want," he whispered, his hand tightening slightly on my hip. "I love a chase." Chapter 3. Breakfast and Bondage. The smell of coffee was the first thing to penetrate my consciousness, rich and dark. They followed closely by the scent of sizzling bacon. I stretched, my limbs heavy and warm, before the memory of the previous night crashed into me. I sat up abruptly. The other side of the massive bed was empty, the sheets cold, though the pillow still carried the scent of rain and cedar. I was alone in the Alpha King's bedroom. The panic that should have been there was strangely muted, replaced by a lingering sense of safety that annoyed me. My wolf was content, curled up and snoozing, happy to be surrounded by the Alpha's pheromones. Traitor! I slid out of bed, my gala dress wrinkled and uncomfortable, and followed the smell. The kitchen was a sleek industrial masterpiece of stainless steel and black marble. Damon stood at the stove, his back to me. He was wearing gray sweatpants that hung low on his hips, and a tight black t-shirt that did nothing to hide the width of his shoulders. He moved with efficient grace, flipping eggs, checking the coffee, seemingly domesticated. It was a jarring contrast to the violence he was capable of. "You're awake," he said, without turning around. "Coffee is in the pot. Mugs are to your left. Do you take sugar, or are you sweet enough?" "I hate you," I mumbled, though it lacked heat. I grabbed a mug and poured the coffee. It was perfect, of course it was. "Hate is a strong emotion," he said, turning around with 2 plates. He set them on the island counter. "It requires passion. I can work with passion." He slid a plate toward me. Eggs, bacon, toast. Simple. Perfect. "Eat. You're too thin. I can see your collarbones from across the room." "I'm not eating your food, Damon. I'm going home. My shift at the bakery starts in 2 hours. "I called your manager," he said, taking a bite of his toast. "I told him you have the flu. You have the week off." I slammed my mug down, coffee sloshing over the rim. "You did what?" "You can't just, I need that job. I have rent to pay." I bought the building, he said calmly. Your rent is covered. Eat your eggs. You bought my apartment building? My voice rose an octave. To save me rent? To ensure your security, he corrected. The lock on your front door was a joke. A stiff breeze could have broken in. Now sit down and eat, Mina. That is an order. The alpha command in his voice was subtle, a low thrum that pushed against my will. My knees buckled, and I sat on the bar stool before I could stop myself. I glared at him, picking up my fork. This is kidnapping. You know that, right? This is a felony. It's aggressive hospitality, he countered, watching me eat with a dark intensity that made my skin prickle. He wasn't eating his own food anymore. He was just feeding on the sight of me. He reached out, his thumb brushing a crumb from the corner of my lip. The contact was electric, shocking. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. You missed a spot, he murmured, his eyes dropping to my lips. Suddenly, the front door slammed open. Damon, you can't just shut down the grid without telling the council. A man stormed into the kitchen. He was tall, lean, with messy blonde hair and the frantic energy of a beta who hadn't slept. He stopped dead when he saw me. I ate a piece of bacon halfway to my mouth, and Damon looming over me like a gargoyle. Oh, the man said, blinking. So the rumors are true. You actually kidnapped the baker. Jax, Damon sighed, not looking away from me. You're interrupting. I'm interrupting a hostage situation, apparently, Jax said, throwing his hands up. Damon, listen to me. You have engaged the full perimeter lockdown. No one comes in, no one goes out. The pack is panicking. They think we're under attack. You have to lift the barrier. I lowered my fork slowly. What barrier? Damon finally looked at Jax, a warning growl vibrating in his chest. Not now, Jax. What barrier? I repeated, standing up. Damon, can I leave this house? Damon turned back to me. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone. You are my mate, Mina. The world outside is dangerous. And until I deem it safe, you locked me in? I backed away from the counter. You locked the whole territory down just to keep me here? I locked the world out, he said, his voice dropping, the gold in his eyes flaring. There is a difference. Not to the prisoner, I whispered. Then be a prisoner, he said, standing up and towering over me. But you are staying. Chapter 4. The Open Door. You are staying, he had said, as if his word was the laws of physics. But I was not a woman who accepted gravity without testing it first. The heavy oak front door of Blackwood Manor was not locked. I expected resistance, a magical seal, or perhaps a guard posted to tackle me, but the latch clicked smoothly under my hand, and the heavy wood swung inward with a silent, well-oiled glide. The cold hit me instantly. A physical slap of freezing mountain air that stole the breath from my lungs and bit into the exposed skin of my arms. I wasn't dressed for this. I was still wearing the clothes I'd slept in, a borrowed shirt of his that hung to my knees, and a pair of leggings I'd found in a drawer. But the open door was a challenge I couldn't ignore, a gaping maw of freedom that demanded I step through it. I glanced back at the grand staircase, half expecting Damon to be standing there, arms crossed, gloating. The hallway was empty. The silence of the house was absolute, save for the crackle of the fire in the distant library. He wasn't stopping me. He was letting me go. I stepped out onto the stone porch, my bare feet sinking into a thin layer of fresh powder that had fallen overnight. The shock of the cold sent a jolt of pain up my ankles, but I gritted my teeth and forced myself to walk. 1 step, 2. The driveway was a sheet of white, winding down into the dense pine forest that surrounded the estate. It was miles to the nearest town, miles of unplowed road in sub-zero temperatures. But my pride was a warm coat, or so I told myself. I wrapped my arms around my chest and marched forward, the wind whipping my hair across my face, stinging my eyes. I can make it, I thought, though my wolf was currently huddled in the back of my mind, calling me an idiot. I can walk until I find a road. I can hitchhike. I can be free. But with every step, the manor loomed behind me, a dark fortress of warmth and safety that felt like a magnet pulling at my very blood. The cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was aggressive. It seeped into my bones within minutes, turning my toes numb and making my teeth chatter so hard I thought they might crack. I made it perhaps 200 yards before I stopped. The realization hit me harder than the wind. I was going to die out here. Not from wolves or monsters, but from the sheer indifference of nature. I turned around, shivering violently, my body shaking so hard I could barely stand. And there he was. Damon stood on the porch, leaning against a stone pillar, wearing nothing but those gray sweatpants and a thin t-shirt, completely unaffected by the freezing temperature. He held a steaming mug of coffee in one hand, watching me with an expression that wasn't triumphant but patient. He hadn't chased me. He hadn't tackled me. He had simply waited for me to realize that he was the only source of heat in a frozen world. The walk back was the longest of my life. A shameful retreat where every step was a concession of defeat. When I finally reached the bottom of the stairs, my lips were blue and my feet were blocks of ice. Damon didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't speak at all. He set his coffee down on the railing and descended the stairs, his movements fluid and predatory. Before I could protest, before I could even formulate a sentence through my chattering teeth, he swept me up into his arms. The heat radiating off him was intense, a furnace that I instinctively burrowed into, pressing my frozen face against the crook of his neck. He carried me inside, kicking the door shut behind us with a definitive thud that sealed out the winter. He carried me straight to the fireplace in the great room, sitting on the plush rug and pulling me into his lap, his large hands rubbing friction into my arms, my back, my legs. "You have spirit, Mina," he murmured against my temple, his voice rumbling through my chest. "But spirit doesn't keep you warm. Give me 7 days, just 7 days to prove I'm not the monster you think I am. If you still want to leave then, I'll drive you myself. I won't let you freeze." Chapter 5. Flower and Pheromones. 3 days into the deal, and the boredom had become a physical weight, heavier than the snow piling up against the windows. Damon was busy in his study for hours at a time, running his empire through hushed phone calls and terrifying Zoom meetings, leaving me to wander the endless halls of Blackwood Manor like a ghost. I needed to do something with my hands other than wring them in anxiety, so I found myself in the kitchen again. This time, I wasn't just eating. I was creating. The pantry was stocked with ingredients that cost more than my entire apartment. Madagascar vanilla beans, imported chocolates, flour milled from grains I'd never heard of. I lost myself in the rhythm of it, the measuring, the mixing, the heat of the oven. It was the only time my mind went quiet. The only time I didn't feel the crushing weight of the alpha's presence pressing against the walls. I was covered in a fine layer of flour, my hair a mess, humming a soft tune as I piped frosting onto a tray of cupcakes. When the air in the kitchen suddenly changed, it wasn't a sound. It was a shift in pressure, a thickening of the atmosphere that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The scent of rain and cedar rolled over me, drowning out the vanilla. I froze, the piping bag hovering over a swirl of buttercream. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I could feel him behind me, a massive brooding presence that radiated heat like a sun. Damon had entered the room silently, his predatory grace making a mockery of his size. He didn't speak, he just watched. I could feel his gaze tracing the line of my spine, the curve of my hips, as I leaned over the counter. It was maddening. It was intoxicating. "You're hovering," I said, my voice sounding breathy and foreign to my own ears. I tried to focus on the cupcake, but my hand trembled, ruining the perfect swirl. "It's distracting." Don't you have a kingdom to rule? The kingdom is quiet, Damon rumbled, stepping closer until his chest brushed my back. I gasped at the contact, the electric shock of it zipping down my legs. He reached around me, his arms caging me against the marble counter, his hands resting on the edge of the stone on either side of my hips. And I would rather watch you. You make domesticity look dangerous, Mina. Before I could retort, his hands moved to my waist. He didn't ask. He didn't warn. He simply lifted me, his grip firm and effortless, and sat me onto the counter. Suddenly, I was eye level with him. The dynamic shifted violently. I was no longer the small Omega looking up. I was face to face with the king, my legs parting naturally to accommodate his hips as he stepped between my knees. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He was so close I could see the flecks of amber in his gold eyes, could see the pores of his skin, could smell the rich dark scent of his desire. He looked at the smudge of frosting on my cheek, then down to my hands, still clutching the piping bag. "You missed a spot," he whispered, his voice dropping an octave, becoming rough and textured like gravel. He took my hand, the one covered in white buttercream, and brought it to his face. He didn't break eye contact as he opened his mouth and took my index finger between his lips. The sensation of his tongue swirling against my skin, hot and wet and deliberate, sent a jolt of pure lust straight to my core. I let out a whimpering sound that I couldn't suppress, my head falling back, my eyes fluttering shut. He sucked the frosting off slowly, thoroughly, treating my finger like it was the only sustenance he needed in the world. When he finally pulled away, a small pop of suction echoing in the quiet kitchen, he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against mine. "You taste better," he groaned, his hands tightening on my thighs, on pulling me flush against him, "than anything you could possibly bake." Chapter 6. The Fever. The heat started in the marrow of my bones, a slow creeping burn that I initially blamed on the ovens. I ignored it for hours, drinking water, splashing my face with cold tap water, convincing myself it was just the stress of captivity or the lingering adrenaline of the past few days. But by evening, the burn had turned into a roar. My skin felt too tight, sensitive to the brush of my own clothes. The air in the manor, usually crisp and cool, felt suffocatingly thick. I sat on the sofa in the library, trying to read a book, but the words swam on the page. Dizziness washed over me in waves, and a deep, aching hollowness opened up in my chest, a void that demanded to be filled. I knew what this was. I had heard the whispers in the pack, the gossip about fated mates, and the biological imperative that forced them together, the mating fever. It wasn't supposed to happen this fast. It wasn't supposed to happen to me. Damon found me curled into a ball on the leather sofa, shivering despite the sweat that beaded on my forehead. I didn't hear him enter. My senses were haywire, everything too loud and too bright. One moment I was alone, and the next he was there, kneeling beside me, his face a mask of concern that quickly morphed into realization. He sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring, and his pupils blew wide, swallowing the gold until his eyes were almost entirely black. The scent of my distress, mixed with the potent, sweet cloy of an omega in preheat, must have hit him like a physical blow. He growled, a low, rumbling sound that wasn't aggressive but possessive. As a vibration that seemed to soothe the ache in my bones. "Mina," he said, his voice strained, tight with control. He touched my forehead with the back of his hand, and I leaned into it, whining at the contact. His skin was cool, a balm against my fire. "You're burning up. Why didn't you tell me?" I thought it was the flu," I slurred, my head lolling back against the cushion. "Make it stop, Damon. It hurts." He scooped me up effortlessly, holding me close to his chest. This time, I didn't fight. I clung to him, burying my face in the crook of his neck, inhaling the scent of him like it was oxygen. He smelled like safety. He smelled like the answer to every question my body was asking. He carried me swiftly to the master bathroom, kicking the door open. He set me down on the closed toilet lid and immediately started turning on the taps of the massive soaking tub, filling the room with the sound of rushing water. He moved with frantic efficiency, pulling towels from the rack, checking the water temperature. "I need you to get in," he commanded softly, turning to face me. "The water is cool. It will bring your temperature down." I tried to stand, but my legs were jelly. I stumbled, and he caught me instantly. His hands on my waist were brands, searing through the thin fabric of my shirt. "Help me," I whispered, not knowing what I was asking for, only knowing that I needed his skin on mine. I reached for the buttons of my shirt, my fingers clumsy and useless. Damon made a noise in his throat, something between a prayer and a curse. He batted my hands away and began to undress me himself. His movements were clinical, detached, but I could feel the tremors in his hands. He stripped me down to my underwear and lowered me into the cool water. The relief was instant, a hiss of steam leaving my body, but it was immediately replaced by a desperate need for him. I reached for him with wet hands, grabbing his shirt, pulling him toward the tub. "Damon, please," I begged, the fever stripping away my pride. "Stay. Come in." He gripped the porcelain edge of the tub until I heard the material creak, threatening to crack. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his eyes wild with a hunger that mirrored my own. But he didn't climb in. He didn't take what I was offering. "Not like this," he grated out. His voice wrecked, a jagged edge of restraint. "I won't take you when you're delirious with fever, Mina. I won't be that monster." He grabbed a washcloth, dipped it in the water, and began to run it over my burning shoulders. His touch gentle, torture, and salvation all at once. Chapter 7. The Alpha's Grooming. The fever broke just before dawn, leaving me hollowed out and trembling like a leaf in a storm. My muscles felt as though they had been liquefied and poured back into my skin haphazardly, leaving me too weak to even lift the heavy duvet that covered me. I was vaguely aware of being moved from the cooling bath back to the bed, of being dried with plush towels that felt like clouds against my sensitized skin. But the memories were hazy, filtered through the fog of delirium. When I finally opened my eyes, the room was bathed in the soft gray light of early morning, and Damon was there. He was sitting on the edge of the mattress. I fully dressed in a crisp black shirt and dark trousers, looking as though he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were fixed on my face, searching for any sign of the heat returning, and the raw relief that washed over his features when he saw I was lucid nearly broke my heart. "You're back," he whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion. He reached out, his hand hovering over my forehead, before gently resting there to check my temperature. "Cool, thank the moon." I tried to sit up, but my arms shook violently, refusing to support my weight. A whimper of frustration escaped my throat, and instantly Damon was moving. He shifted closer, sliding an arm behind my back to prop me up against the mound of pillows he had arranged. "Easy, Mina. Your body just burned through a week's worth of energy in 12 hours. You need to rest." "I feel gross," I croaked, my voice sounding like I had swallowed gravel. "My hair." "I'll take care of it," he said simply. Before I could protest, he reached for a silver hairbrush on the nightstand. He moved behind me on the massive bed, positioning himself so I was resting between his spread legs, my back against his chest. It was an incredibly intimate position, one that should have made me panic, but I was too weak to fight the comfort of his solid warmth. He began to brush my hair. His strokes were long, rhythmic, and impossibly gentle. He worked through the tangles with the patience of a saint, his large, lethal hands treating me as if I were made of spun glass. The sensation was hypnotic. With every pass of the bristles against my scalp, a shiver of pleasure rolled down my spine. and soothing the lingering aches in my joints. "Why are you doing this?" I murmured, leaning back into him despite myself. "You're a king. You have servants for this. I sent them away, remember?" He paused, his hand resting on my shoulder, his thumb tracing the line of my collarbone through the silk of my borrowed shirt. "And even if they were here, I wouldn't let them touch you. Not right now." "Because you're possessive," I accused weakly. "Because I'm selfish," he corrected, his voice vibrating against my back. "Do you know how long it has been since I touched someone without them flinching? Without them calculating what they could get from me? A century of handshakes and formal bows, Mina. A century of people terrified to breathe the same air as me." He resumed brushing, the motion lulling me into a trance. "Taking care of you. Oh, it quiets the noise in my head. It makes the beast settle. When I hold you, the world stops screaming." The vulnerability in his voice stunned me into silence. The Alpha King, the monster of the mountains, was admitting that he was lonely, that he was touch-starved. I turned my head slightly, catching a glimpse of his jaw, tense and shadowed with stubble. Without thinking, I reached up, placing my hand over his heart. The muscle leaped under my palm, hammering a frantic rhythm that betrayed his calm exterior. "Your heart is racing," I whispered. He stopped brushing. He didn't pull away. Instead, he covered my hand with his own, pressing it harder against his chest. "That happens," he said, his gold eyes burning into mine, "every time you let me in." Chapter 8. The Socialite's Mistake. By the afternoon, I felt human enough to leave the sanctuary of the bedroom. My legs were still a little unsteady, but the cabin fever was worse than the fatigue. I wandered down the grand staircase, drawn by the sound of voices in the foyer. I expected to find Jax, or perhaps a returning servant, but instead, I found a woman who looked like she had walked straight out of a high-fashion editorial. She was tall, statuesque, with sleek blonde hair, and a white fur coat that probably cost more than the bakery I worked in. She was standing by the fireplace in the great room, inspecting a vase with a look of critical disdain. When she heard my footsteps, she turned, her eyes raking over me from my messy bun to the oversized wool socks I was wearing. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with polite venom. "You must be the little stray Damon picked up. And I heard the rumors, but I assumed they were exaggerated. He usually has better taste." I froze on the bottom step, my grip tightening on the banister. "Excuse me," she laughed, a tinkling, humorless sound. "Don't look so offended, darling. I'm Lady Giselle of the Northern Pine Pack. My father and Damon have been discussing an alliance for years, an alliance that naturally includes a queen. I assumed he was just working some things out of his system before the real negotiations began. But looking at you, a bakery rat with flour under her fingernails, I'm surprised he even bothered. Does he make you wear the apron in bed?" Her words were sharp little daggers, aimed with precision to find the deepest insecurities I had. I opened my mouth to retort, to tell her exactly where she could shove her fur coat. No, but the temperature in the room suddenly plummeted. It wasn't a draft. It was a pressure drop so severe my ears popped. Giselle. The name was spoken softly, but it carried the weight of a guillotine blade dropping. Damon stood in the archway of the dining room. He wasn't looking at Giselle. He was looking at me, scanning my face for the hurt she had inflicted. When he saw the moisture gathering in my eyes, his expression went terrifyingly blank. He walked into the room, and the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and impending violence. Giselle paled, taking a step back. "Damon," she stammered, her confidence evaporating. We were just getting acquainted." I was explaining the political situation to her. "You were insulting my mate in my home," Damon said. His voice was devoid of inflection, odd, which made it infinitely scarier than if he had shouted. He didn't stop walking until he was standing between us, his back to me, a living wall of protection. He towered over the woman, his alpha aura expanding until the windows rattled in their frames. Giselle dropped to her knees, not out of respect, but because the sheer weight of his power forced her down. She gasped for air, clutching her throat. "Please," she wheezed. "Damon, I didn't know." "You didn't know she was mine?" Damon tilted his head, looking down at her like she was an insect. "You smelled my scent on her the moment you walked through the door. You chose to ignore it. You chose to disrespect the only thing in this world that I care about." He took a step closer, and Giselle whimpered, pressing her forehead to the floor in absolute submission. "Get out," he whispered. "If you are not off my land in 5 minutes, I will forget that I am a civilized man. I will forget your father's alliance, and I will remind you why they call me the Butcher of Blackwood." She scrambled up and ran, the heavy front door slamming behind her. The silence she left behind was deafening. I stared at Damon's back, my heart pounding. He had nearly crushed her with his presence alone, yet I had felt nothing but a warm breeze. He had shielded me completely from his rage. He turned slowly, the gold in his eyes fading back to a manageable simmer, but his jaw was still locked tight. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough. "You terrified her," I whispered. "You terrified me." "Good," he said, walking toward me. "Let the world be terrified. As long as you are safe, let them burn." Chapter 9. The Library Scene. "I can fight my own battles, Damon," I argued, following him into the library. The adrenaline from the confrontation with Giselle had morphed into a strange, frantic energy that I didn't know what to do with. I was angry that he had intervened, and yet traitorously, my body was humming with the knowledge that he had defended me so violently. "I don't need you to crush everyone who looks at me sideways. I have a voice." "You have a voice," Damon agreed, turning on his heel so abruptly I almost ran into his chest. "And it is sweet and lovely, but Giselle is a viper. She doesn't listen to voices, she listens to force." I provided the translation. "I am not a damsel," I shouted, pushing against his chest. It was like pushing against a stone wall. "Stop treating me like I'm breakable. Stop wrapping me in cotton and hiding me away." Damon caught my wrists, his grip firm but careful. He walked me backward until my spine hit the towering shelves of the history section. The smell of old paper, leather bindings, and his overwhelming cedar scent surrounded me, clouding my judgment. He stepped into my space, his thighs brushing mine, pinning me against the books, not with his weight, but with his presence. "You are breakable, Mina," he growled, lowering his head until our noses were almost touching. "You are mortal, you are fragile, and you are the only thing keeping my heart beating. If something happens to you, if someone hurts you, I will tear the world apart to fix it. Do you understand that? It isn't about control, it's about terror. My terror." The admission hung in the air between us, raw and bleeding. And he wasn't trying to dominate me for the sake of power. He was terrified of losing me. The realization sapped the anger right out of my legs. I looked up at him, seeing the desperation etched into the lines around his eyes. My breath hitched. "Damon," I whispered. He didn't wait for permission this time. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply, his nose brushing against the sensitive skin right over my pulse. I gasped, my head falling back against the books. He groaned, a low vibration that went straight to my core. He began to rub his cheek against my neck, marking me, covering the lingering scent of my distress with his own heavy possessive musk. It was a primal claim, one that bypassed my human logic and spoke directly to the wolf inside me. "Mine," he murmured against my skin, his lips grazing the column of my throat. "You smell like fear and vanilla. Let me fix it." His hands moved from my wrists to my waist, pulling me flush against him. I could feel the hard ridge of his desire against my stomach, a stark reminder of the restraint he was exercising. He trailed kisses up my jawline, each one a brand, scorching my skin. I gripped his shoulders, my fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer instead of pushing him away. I wanted him to kiss me. I wanted him to consume me. He pulled back just as his lips were about to brush mine, leaving me breathless and aching. His eyes were dark, swirling with a hunger that threatened to swallow us both. "You have 3 days left on our deal," he rasped, his voice ragged. 3 days to decide if you want to leave. But I am warning you, Mina. My patience is hanging by a thread. I need you to choose me. Because if you don't choose me soon, I'm going to stop asking and start taking. And if I don't want to leave, I challenged, my voice barely a whisper. He leaned in, his mouth hovering millimeters from mine, the heat radiating between us hot enough to burn. "Then prove it," he said. "Stop fighting the bond. Stop fighting me." Chapter 10. The Nightmare. The dream was always the same. I was walking through a crowded room, screaming at the top of my lungs, but no sound came out. People I knew, my old pack, my coworkers, my parents, brushed past me, walking through my body as if I were made of mist. I was a ghost in my own life, untethered and unseen, fading into the gray background until I ceased to exist entirely. The terror wasn't in the dying. It was in the realization that no one would notice I was gone. The silence was a physical weight, crushing my chest, filling my lungs with sludge until I couldn't breathe. I clawed at my throat, gasping for air that wouldn't come, the darkness swallowing me whole. I woke with a gasp that tore through my throat like a jagged stone. The room was dark, but the silence wasn't the empty, terrifying void of my nightmare. It was heavy and warm. Before I could even orient myself, strong hands were on me. Damon was there instantly, pulling me from the tangle of sheets where I had been thrashing. I was drenched in cold sweat, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I flinched away instinctively, the phantom feeling of being invisible still clinging to my skin, but he didn't let go. And he didn't speak. He seemed to know that words would only bounce off the panic. Instead, he pulled back, creating space between us on the mattress, and I felt the air pressure in the room shift violently. Bones cracked and shifted, with a wet, heavy sound that should have been grotesque but felt strangely natural. In the space of a heartbeat, the man was gone. In his place stood a wolf of monstrous proportions, his fur the color of a starless night. He was massive, easily the size of a pony, with shoulders that blocked out the dim light from the window. His eyes, glowing with that familiar molten gold, fixed on me with an intensity that anchored me back to reality. He didn't lunge. He simply lowered his massive head and nudged my shoulder with his wet nose. A soft whine vibrating in his chest. The fear evaporated. I replaced by an overwhelming sense of safety. I reached out, my trembling fingers burying themselves in the thick, coarse fur around his neck. He was solid. He was real. He chuffed, a warm burst of air against my face, and then circled me once before collapsing onto the mattress with a heavy thud. He curled his massive body around mine, creating a living wall of heat and fur that shielded me from the shadows. I pressed my face into his flank, inhaling the scent of wild forest and musk, and the nightmare dissolved completely. I wasn't invisible here. I was the center of his universe. I fell asleep to the slow, steady rhythm of his giant heart beating against my cheek. When I woke again, the sun was streaming through the curtains, blindingly bright. I stretched, expecting to feel coarse fur, but instead, my legs slid over warm, smooth skin. I froze, my eyes snapping open. The wolf was gone. I was wrapped around Damon, human, naked, and very much awake. My thigh was thrown over his hip, my arm draped across his chest, and our faces were inches apart. He was watching me with a lazy, satisfied expression, his hand resting possessively on the curve of my waist. "Good morning," he rumbled, his voice thick with sleep and amusement. You drooled on me. Chapter 11. The Truth About the Punch. I scrambled backward, putting a few inches of safety between us, though the heat of his skin lingered on mine like a brand. I did not drool, I lied, wiping my mouth self-consciously. And you? You were a wolf. I was, Damon agreed, propping his head up on one hand, the sheet slipping dangerously low on his hips. He didn't seem the least bit concerned about his nudity or the intimacy of our position. You were screaming. My human side wanted to shake you awake, but the wolf knew better. He knew you needed something solid to hold on to. I looked at him, really looked at him. The bruising on his nose from my punch days ago was completely gone, healed by his shifter metabolism without a trace. It brought the memory of that night rushing back, the violence, the fear, and the baffling reaction he'd had. "Why did you smile?" I asked quietly. The question that had been haunting me finally spilling out. That night at the gala, I broke your nose. I humiliated you in front of the entire court. You should have killed me, or at least thrown me in a cell. But you smiled. Damon's expression sobered. He sat up, the sheet pooling at his waist. And the playful glint in his eyes was replaced by a raw honesty that stole the breath from my lungs. "Do you know what it is like to be the Alpha King, Mina?" He looked out the window at the snow-covered peaks. "It is a life of absolute crushing boredom. Everyone I meet wants something. They want power, money, protection, or status. They fawn, they bow, they agree with everything I say, even when I'm wrong. I haven't had a genuine interaction with another living soul in decades." He turned back to me, his gaze intense. "Then you came along. A tiny thing with no rank and no army. And you looked at me with absolute disdain. You didn't see a king, you saw an annoyance. And when I pushed you, you didn't cower. You fought back." He reached out, taking my hand, the one I had used to strike him, and cradled it gently. The pain was the first real thing I'd felt in years. You broke through the numbness. You didn't care about the crown. You just wanted me to get out of your way. He guided my hand to his throat, placing my palm flat against the erratic pulse of his jugular. It was the ultimate sign of submission, a predator offering his most vulnerable point to his mate. "I smiled because I knew," he whispered, his eyes searching mine. "I knew that if anyone could handle the monster in me, it was the woman brave enough to punch him in the face." He pressed my hand harder against his throat. "Break me again, Mina. Shatter my pride. Ruin me. I am yours to destroy." The sheer weight of his confession pinned me to the bed. He wasn't asking for my submission. He was offering me his. "I don't want to destroy you," I whispered, but my thumb brushing the strong column of his neck. "Then stay," he breathed, leaning into my touch. "Because if you leave, that is exactly what will happen." Chapter 12. The Deal Expires. The 7th day dawned gray and cold, the sky heavy with the promise of more snow. I packed my small bag in silence. The room felt different now, less like a prison, and more like a sanctuary I was foolishly abandoning. Every item I folded felt heavy, weighted down by my own hesitation. I kept waiting for him to storm in, to declare the deal null and void, to lock the doors and demand I stay. But the door remained open. The house remained quiet. When I walked down the stairs, Damon was waiting by the front door. He was dressed in a dark suit, his keys in hand, looking every inch the indifferent monarch. But I could smell him, and the scent of rain and cedar was bitter, sharp with suppressed distress. He didn't offer to carry my bag. He didn't try to stop me. He simply opened the door and walked out into the cold, expecting me to follow. The drive back to the city was agonizing. The silence in the car was thick enough to choke on. Every mile that passed felt like a physical tether being stretched to its breaking point. I sat with my hands clenched in my lap, staring out the window. watching the pristine forest give way to the gray slush of the city streets. My wolf was howling in my head, a mournful, angry sound that clawed at my chest. "Go back," she demanded. "He is ours." But my stubborn human pride held the wheel. I had to know if this was real. I had to know if I could exist without him. Damon pulled up to the curb of my apartment building. It looked smaller than I remembered, shabbier. The brick was crumbling, and the windows were grimy. It didn't look like home anymore. It looked like a box. He killed the engine, but didn't get out. He turned in his seat to face me, his face an unreadable mask. "I kept my word," he said, his voice flat. "7 days. You are free to go." "You bought the building," I reminded him, my hand hovering over the door handle. "So technically, you're still my landlord." "Technicalities," he dismissed softly. He looked at my hand on the latch, then up to my eyes. For a second the mask slipped, and I saw the devastation underneath. "I won't beg, Mina. Kings don't beg. But know this, I am not locking the door behind you. If you walk away now, I will respect it, but I will not stop waiting." "Why are you letting me go?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You could make me stay. You're strong enough." "Because I don't want a prisoner," he said, reaching across the console to unlock my door. His knuckles brushed my knee, a fleeting spark of heat that made me ache. "I want a queen, and queens don't bow because they have to. They bow because they choose to." I opened the door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The city air smelled of exhaust and garbage, a stark contrast to the crisp purity of the mountains. I slammed the car door shut, severing the connection. Damon didn't drive away immediately. He watched me walk to the entrance of my building, his golden eyes burning into my back until I disappeared inside. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, my keys fumbling in the lock. When I finally pushed the door open, the silence that greeted me wasn't peaceful. It was deafening. The air was stale. The space was empty. I dropped my bag on the floor and stood there, alone in the dark, realizing with a sinking heart that I had just walked away from the only place where I had ever truly been seen. Chapter 13. The Empty Apartment. The silence of my apartment was not the peaceful solitude I had convinced myself I craved. It was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of dust and stale air that settled into my lungs with every breath. I stood in the center of my living room, my bag still heavy on my shoulder, staring at the peeling beige paint and the radiator that rattled with a metallic cough. For years, this space had been my sanctuary, a hard-won fortress against a world that didn't care if I existed. But now it felt like a shoebox. It felt like a cage. The air didn't smell like cedar or rain or the intoxicating masculine musk of a king. It smelled of lemon cleaner and loneliness. I shivered, the cold seeping through the soles of my boots, realizing with a sinking heart that the warmth I was missing wasn't something a thermostat could fix. My body ached with a phantom pain, a hollowness in my chest where the bond had hummed only hours ago, now stretched thin and taut across the miles between us. I dropped my bag on the floor, the thud echoing too loudly in the small space, and walked mechanically to the kitchen. I needed to do something with my hands, something familiar to ground me back in a reality where I was just Mina the baker, not the potential queen of the High Ridge. I pulled a bag of flour from the pantry, the paper crinkling under my fingers. But as I reached for a mixing bowl, my hand froze. The smooth ceramic was cold against my skin. Nothing like the heated marble of Damon's kitchen counter. Nothing like the searing warmth of his hands on my waist. A memory washed over me, visceral and overwhelming. Damon lifting me, his eyes dark with hunger, sucking the frosting from my finger as if it were ambrosia. I squeezed my eyes shut, gasping as the image burned behind my lids. I could still feel the ghost of his touch on my hips, the phantom pressure of his chest against my back. I wasn't just haunting this apartment. I was being haunted by a ghost who was still very much alive. "Get it together," I whispered to the empty room, but my voice cracked, thin and pathetic. My wolf howled in response, a mournful, keening sound that ripped through my internal landscape. She was pacing inside me, scratching at the walls of my chest, furious and grieving. She didn't understand lease agreements or human pride. She only knew that her mate was gone, and that we had walked away from the only safety we had ever known. I sank onto the linoleum floor, pulling my knees to my chest, and let the truth wash over me. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want the freedom to be invisible again. I wanted the heavy, terrifying, wonderful weight of his attention. I wanted his eyes following me across the room. I wanted the way he made me feel like the only living thing in the universe. I had spent so much time fearing that he would trap me that I hadn't realized I had built my own prison long before he ever showed up. Hours bled into the evening, the shadows lengthening across the floor like reaching fingers. I hadn't moved. I hadn't turned on a light. The darkness was absolute, but it held no comfort. No giant black wolf to curl around me and chase the nightmares away. I was just deciding to swallow my pride, to grab my keys and drive back to the mountain, back to him, when a sound shattered the stillness. A knock. It was heavy, authoritative. 3 sharp raps against the flimsy wood of my front door. My heart stopped, then restarted at double speed. Hope, bright and agonizing, flared in my chest. He had come. He hadn't waited. He had driven back down the mountain because he couldn't stand the separation any more than I could. I scrambled to my feet, my limbs stiff, wiping the tears from my cheeks as I rushed to the door. I didn't even check the peephole. I didn't hesitate. I threw the deadbolt and yanked the door open, a smile already forming on my lips, and on my soul ready to surrender. "I knew you would." The words died on my tongue, turning to ash. The man standing in the hallway was not Damon. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in an expensive suit, but the air around him was wrong. It smelled of sulfur and rot, a sharp acidic tang that made my wolf bristle in immediate warning. It was the alpha from the Western pack, the one with the cold eyes who had watched Damon claim me at the gala with a look of calculating malice. He wasn't smiling. He was staring at me with the cold, dead eyes of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "So," he drawled, stepping forward before I could slam the door, his foot wedged firmly against the jamb. "The rumors are true. The king left his little pet unguarded." He pushed the door open effortlessly, forcing me back into the dark apartment. Big mistake. Chapter 14. The Hunt. The intruder's hand clamped around my wrist like a manacle, his grip bruising and hot with intent. He didn't smell like the crisp mountain air or the rich, intoxicating cedar that had surrounded me for the last week. He smelled of sulfur and stale ambition, a rot that made my stomach turn. He yanked me toward him, a sneer curling his lip as he looked around my dingy apartment with disdain. He thought I was weak. He thought I was just a baker, a discarded toy that the king had grown bored of and left behind. He didn't know that for the last 7 days, I had watched the most dangerous predator on the continent train. I had watched Damon move, analyzed his leverage, and absorbed the ruthless efficiency of how he dismantled his enemies. "You're hurting me," I said, my voice deceptively calm, and channeling the icy stillness I had seen in Damon's eyes right before he struck. "That's the point, sweetheart," the alpha sneered, tightening his grip. "I'm going to make you scream, and then I'm going to send the recording to your precious king. Let's see if he comes running for damaged goods." He pulled me harder, off balance, intending to throw me onto the sofa. I went with the momentum instead of fighting it. I stepped into his space, driving the heel of my palm upward with every ounce of strength I possessed, aiming directly for the soft cartilage of his nose. It was a clumsy imitation of the strike that had started this entire affair, but it was effective. He howled, his grip loosening just enough for me to wrench my arm free. I didn't wait to see the damage. I turned and scrambled toward the hallway, for my boots skidding on the linoleum. "You little bitch!" he roared, the sound wet and gurgling. I threw myself into the bathroom, slamming the door and twisting the flimsy lock just as his heavy body collided with the wood. The frame shuddered, plaster dust raining down from the ceiling. It wouldn't hold. I knew it wouldn't hold. I backed into the furthest corner, between the toilet and the bathtub, my trembling hands fumbling for my phone. My fingers slipped over the screen, smeared with sweat and terror, as I hit the speed dial I had programmed only hours ago. I didn't call the police. The police couldn't stop an alpha. I called the monster. "Mina," Damon answered on the first ring. His voice wasn't the smooth, controlled baritone of the king. It was a jagged growl, breathless and panicked. He must have felt my fear through the bond the moment the intruder touched me. "Damon!" I screamed, the name ripping out of my throat as the bathroom door splintered under another heavy blow. "He's here! He's in the apartment!" "I'm coming!" he roared. I heard the scream of an engine pushed beyond its limits, the wind whipping so loud it distorted the connection. "Lock the door. Get in the tub. Do not hang up." "I can't. The door won't hold," I sobbed, sliding down the tiled wall. The wood groaned again, a fist punching through the hollow panel near the handle. "Damon, please." "I am 2 minutes away," he snarled, and I could hear the feral edge in his voice, the man slipping away to make room for the beast. "Fight him, Mina. Throw everything you have at him. I am coming for you. I will burn the city to get to you." The bathroom door gave way with a deafening crack. The intruder stood there, blood streaming from his nose, his eyes black with murderous rage. He stepped over the debris, a predator cornering its prey. I dropped the phone, but I didn't hang up. I grabbed the heavy ceramic lid of the toilet tank, lifting it with a strength born of pure adrenaline. "Damon!" I screamed one last time. Then the world exploded. It wasn't the bathroom door, it was the front door of the apartment. I heard the wood shatter, followed by a sound that froze the blood in my veins. A roar so loud, so primal, it shook the foundations of the building. The intruder froze, his head snapping toward the hallway. His expression shifted from rage to absolute, paralyzing terror. He smelled it. He smelled the king. No," the intruder whispered, backing away from me. "No, he left. He left you." A black blur tore through the apartment. There was no speech, no negotiation. There was only the wet, tearing sound of violence. The intruder was yanked backward out of the bathroom doorway, as if he weighed nothing. I heard a sickening thud against the wall, a gargled plea for mercy, and then a silence so profound it was heavier than the noise. I sat in the bathtub, clutching the ceramic lid, my chest heaving. The air in the apartment had changed. The sulfur smell was gone, obliterated by the overwhelming scent of ozone, rain, and blood. Heavy footsteps approached the bathroom. They were slow, dragging slightly. A figure filled the broken doorway. Damon stood there, his chest heaving, his suit jacket gone. His white shirt shredded and soaked in crimson that wasn't his. His hands were coated in it. His eyes were glowing so bright they illuminated the dark hallway. He looked like a nightmare. He looked like death incarnate. He looked at me huddled in the tub, and the monster in his face shattered, leaving only a man consumed by terrified love. "Mina," he choked out, falling to his knees in the broken wood and plaster. He reached for me, his bloody hands hovering, afraid to touch. Is he? I dropped the tank lid and scrambled out of the tub, throwing myself at him. I didn't care about the blood. I didn't care about the violence. I wrapped my arms around his neck and buried my face in his ruined shirt, sobbing his name. "I've got you," he wept, crushing me against his chest, rocking us back and forth on the floor. "I've got you, and I'm never letting you go again." Chapter 15. The Claiming. I didn't remember the drive back to the mountain. My memory was a fractured kaleidoscope of roaring engines, the terrifying speed of the landscape blurring past, and the ironclad grip of Damon's hand on my thigh. He drove with a lethal focus, as if the very road were an enemy he had to conquer to get me to safety. I didn't look at the speedometer. I just watched him. The blood of the man who had tried to hurt me was drying on his knuckles, a stark, violent reminder of what he was capable of. Yet his touch on my skin was trembling with restraint. He wasn't the king in that car. He was a man who had stared into the abyss of loss and was still reeling from the vertigo. We didn't speak. There were no words left that could bridge the gap between the violence of the apartment and the desperate, clawing need that was rising in my chest like a tide. When we reached the manor, he didn't even bother to park properly. He abandoned the car at the foot of the stairs, the engine still ticking as he hauled me out and into his arms. I buried my face in his neck, inhaling the scent of him, rain, cedar, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care about dignity. I didn't care about independence. I wrapped my legs around his waist, clinging to him as he kicked the front door open and carried me up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. The world outside had tried to break me, but here, in the fortress of his arms, I was untouchable. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had been so afraid of losing myself to him that I hadn't realized I was already gone. I loved him. I loved the monster, the king, the protector, and the man who made me breakfast. He carried me straight to the master bathroom, kicking the door shut behind us. He set me down on the vanity counter, his hands immediately going to my face, cupping my cheeks, tilting my head back so he could devour me with his eyes. He scanned every inch of skin, looking for bruises, for cuts, for anything that the intruder might have left behind. When he found nothing but my tear-stained cheeks, a shudder ripped through his massive frame, and he collapsed forward, burying his face in the crook of my neck. I was almost too late, he groaned, his voice wrecked, vibrating against my pulse. Mina, I was almost too late. If he had touched you, if he had taken you from me. You weren't late, I whispered, my hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. You came for me, you came. I will always come for you, he vowed, pulling back to look at me. His eyes were wild, the gold swirling with a hunger that was terrifying and beautiful. But I need to be sure. I need to know you're here. I need to feel you. He turned on the faucet, shoving his hands under the scalding water, scrubbing the other alpha's blood from his skin with frantic, rough movements. He wouldn't touch me with dirty hands. The gesture broke me. I reached out, turning off the tap, and took his wet, red raw hands in mine. I brought them to my lips, kissing the knuckles he had used to defend me. Make me yours, Damon, I begged. The words tumbling out before I could second-guess them. Don't ask me this time. Just take me. I don't want to be free anymore. I want to be yours. The restraint he had been holding on to snapped. He let out a low, guttural growl that shook the walls, and then his mouth was on mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was a claiming. He devoured me, his tongue sweeping into my mouth, tasting me, branding me. His hands tore at my clothes, buttons flying, fabric ripping, until there was nothing between us but skin and heat and desperate, blinding need. He lifted me again, carrying me to the bed, and followed me down into the mattress, his weight a heavy, perfect blanket that shielded me from everything else. The intimacy was a blur of sensation. It was the friction of skin on skin, the taste of salt and desire, and the sound of my name being worshipped like a prayer against my throat. He moved with a desperation that mirrored my own, his hands mapping my body as if memorizing it for a time when he might be blind. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a vow. I arched into him, meeting his thrusts, clawing at his shoulders, kneading him closer, deeper, until there was no way to tell where I ended and he began. The pleasure built in waves, higher and faster, until I was sobbing his name, shattering apart in his arms. But he didn't stop. He held me through the aftershocks, his body tense, his eyes locked on the junction of my neck and shoulder. The mating spot. It pulsed under his gaze, aching, calling to him. "Mina," he rasped, his fangs lengthening, sharp and white against his bottom lip. "Let me seal it. Let me bind us. I can't breathe until I know you can't leave." "Do it!" I cried out, tilting my head to the side, baring my throat to the wolf. "Bite me, Damon. Claim me." He didn't hesitate. He surged forward, his mouth covering the sensitive skin, and then with a sharp, exquisite pinch of pain, he sank his teeth in. The world turned white. The bond slammed into place like a steel trap, a rush of golden light and pure emotion flooding my mind. I felt his love, his possessiveness, his relief. It was a tidal wave that drowned out the last of my fear. I wasn't just Mina anymore. I was his, and he was mine, completely, irrevocably, and forever. Chapter 16. The morning after. Waking up used to be a solitary experience, a slow, groggy climb from the depths of sleep into the cold reality of my apartment. But this morning, so there was no cold, and there was certainly no solitude. The first thing I registered was the weight. A heavy, muscular arm draped across my waist, pinning me to the mattress with an effortless permanence that told me exactly where I belonged. The second thing was the hum. It was a low, vibrating frequency at the base of my skull, a golden thread of sensation that wasn't my own. It felt like sunlight hitting a frozen lake, like the purr of a satisfied cat, like absolute, unshakable contentment. It was him. I could feel Damon's emotions as clearly as I could feel the sheets against my skin. There was no wall between us anymore, no guessing games or misinterpreted glances. The bond was wide open, a floodgate of shared consciousness that terrified me as much as it thrilled me. I shifted slightly, testing the limits of his grip, and the hum in my mind spiked with a lazy, possessive amusement. "Don't even think about it!" A rough, sleep-heavy voice rumbled directly into my ear. Damon tightened his hold, pulling me back until my spine was flush against his chest. His nose buried itself in the curve of my neck, right over the tender, throbbing spot where he had marked me. The sensation sent a jolt of electricity down my legs, causing my toes to curl. The sun is barely up. The world is still turning without us. You are not leaving this bed. "I have to pee," I whispered, though the protest was weak even to my own ears. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay in this cocoon of warmth and cedar scent forever, wrapped in the arms of the man who had torn the world apart to find me. "Negotiable," he mumbled, pressing a wet, open-mouthed kiss to the bite mark. And the sting of it had faded to a dull, throbbing ache that felt more like a trophy than an injury. "But you come right back. No wandering, no escaping. If I wake up and you aren't within reaching distance, I'm going to assume someone stole you, and I'll have to burn the city down again. It's exhausting being a warlord, Mina. Give me a day off." I turned in his arms, maneuvering until I was facing him. He looked wrecked in the most beautiful way possible, hair messy, eyes half-lidded, and glowing with that molten gold, a shadow of stubble darkening his jaw. But underneath the exhaustion, there was a smugness that radiated off him in waves. He looked like a dragon sleeping on his hoard. He reached up, his thumb tracing the line of my lower lip, his gaze heavy and focused. "You're loud," he noted softly, tapping my temple. "Your thoughts. They're spinning. You're worrying about the bakery. You're worrying about the press. You're worrying about whether I'm going to turn into a tyrant now that I've bitten you." "I'm not worried about the tyrant part," I admitted, leaning into his touch. "I punched the tyrant. I can handle him. But I'm serious about the rest, Damon. This," I gestured between us, encompassing the bed, the bond, the mark. This changes everything. I know that. I'm the alpha's mate now. I'm the queen or whatever ridiculous title they're going to throw at me. But I can't just be that. I can't just be Damon's mate. I was Mina before I met you, and I need to stay Mina. Damon's eyes sharpened, the sleepiness evaporating instantly. He didn't look angry, he looked attentive. He propped himself up on one elbow, the sheet falling to his waist. It's revealing the scratches on his chest that I had put there hours ago. "Tell me what you need," he commanded. It wasn't an order to submit. It was an order to speak. "I told you once, I don't want a prisoner. I want a partner. Lay out your terms, little wolf." I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the overwhelming urge to just agree with whatever he wanted, because he was looking at me like I was the only star in his sky. "The bakery," I said firmly. "I keep it. I work there. I don't want to just own it from a distance. I want to be in the kitchen. I want flour in my hair and burns on my arms. It grounds me. If I spend all day in this castle wearing silk and planning galas, I will lose my mind." "Done," he said immediately, no hesitation. "I'll hire a security detail that looks like customers. You won't even know they're there. I next." I blinked, surprised by how easy that was. "Okay. Second, I am not a trophy. I don't want to stand silently by your side while you discuss politics. If I'm queen, I want to know what's happening. I want a seat at the table, not just a spot on your arm." "You have my mark on your neck," Damon said, his voice dropping an octave. "That gives you more authority than the council combined. If you speak, they listen. If they don't, I remove their tongues. Next." "And third," I said, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "If you ever go alpha hole on me again, if you ever lock me in or make decisions for me without asking, I reserve the right to punch you. Anywhere, anytime. No retaliation allowed." Damon threw his head back and laughed, a rich booming sound that filled the room and made my heart soar. He looked at me with such fierce, unadulterated pride that I felt tears prick my eyes. He lunged forward, tackling me back onto the pillows, hovering over me with a grin that was all teeth and promise. "You drive a hard bargain, Mina," he growled, lowering his face until his lips were brushing mine. "But I accept your terms. You keep your flower, you keep your voice, and you can break my nose every Tuesday if it makes you happy." He kissed me then, hard and deep, sealing the deal with the taste of his soul. When he pulled back, his expression was deadly serious, the gold in his eyes swirling with an infinite, terrifying depth. "The bakery is yours, but make no mistake, the baker belongs to me." Chapter 17. The Queen of Blackwood. The morning rush at the Gilded Crumb was usually a chaotic symphony of espresso machines hissing, oven timers beeping, and the murmur of customers desperate for their sugar fix. But lately, the atmosphere had shifted into something strangely disciplined. I stood behind the marble counter, piping rosettes of lavender buttercream onto a tray of cupcakes, and allowed myself a small private smile as I scanned the room. To the untrained eye, it was just a busy Tuesday. To me, it was a tactical operation masquerading as a brunch spot. The man in the corner booth, reading a newspaper, hadn't turned a page in 40 minutes, his eyes darting to the door every time the bell chimed. The woman by the window, nursing a latte, was actually one of the deadliest enforcers in the territory, her relaxed posture belying the fact that she could snap a threat in half before they even reached the register. And this was the compromise Damon and I had reached. I got to keep my flour and my independence, and he got to turn my bakery into the most heavily guarded fortress in the city. I wiped my hands on my apron, the familiar grit of sugar grounding me in a life that felt like a fairy tale I hadn't asked for, but would fight to the death to keep. 3 months ago, I was invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of a pack that didn't know my name. Now, the mark on my neck, a faint silver scar that throbbed with a pleasant heat whenever he was near, flashed proudly every time I turned my head. The customers didn't just order pastries anymore. They dipped their heads in respectful, terrified little bows, whispering Luna or Your Highness when they thought I couldn't hear. It was ridiculous, really, but Damon insisted it was only right. He had spent a century making the world fear him, and now he was spending every waking moment making sure the world knew that the only thing he feared was disappointing me. The heavy swing door to the industrial kitchen pushed open, not with the frantic energy of my sous chef, but with a slow, heavy confidence that made the air pressure in the room drop. The scent hit me first: rainwater, deep cedar, and the crisp, expensive smell of a custom suit. Damon walked in, looking entirely out of place among the stainless steel and industrial mixers. He was dressed for a council meeting in a charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than the ovens, but his tie was already loosened, and his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing the corded muscle of his forearms. He didn't say a word to the staff. Team Hu immediately scattered like leaves in a windstorm, giving the alpha a wide, terrified berth. He only had eyes for me. The predator in him was always close to the surface. But in this kitchen, surrounded by the smell of yeast and vanilla, he looked less like a king and more like a man who had finally found his way home. "You're late," I said, not looking up from my piping, though my heart had already kicked into a double-time rhythm that betrayed my cool demeanor. "And you are definitely in the way. This is a workspace, Damon, not a throne room." "I missed you," he rumbled, ignoring my reprimand as he stepped up behind me. He didn't care about the flour dusting the air or the sticky counters. He pressed his front to my back, wrapping his massive arms around my waist and burying his face in the crook of my neck. And the heat of him was overwhelming, a furnace that melted my professional resolve instantly. 3 hours in a budget meeting. It felt like a lifetime. I needed to recharge. He inhaled deeply against my marking spot, and a shiver of pure pleasure zipped down my spine, nearly causing me to crush the piping bag. "You have flour on your shirt," I pointed out, leaning back into him despite my protest. "The council is going to think you've lost your mind." "Let them think what they want," he murmured, his hand sliding over my apron to rest possessively on my stomach. "I own the council, I own the building, and most importantly, I own the baker." He turned me around in his arms, lifting me effortlessly until I was sitting on the edge of the prep table, eye level with him. It was a mirror of that day in his kitchen, months ago, but the fear was gone. In its place was a bone-deep certainty that this man would burn the world down before he let me fall. He reached out, his thumb brushing a smudge of purple frosting from my cheek, his golden eyes soft and devastatingly loving. "You've changed everything, Mina," he said quietly, the playfulness fading into something raw. "This city used to be gray. My life used to be gray. Now, it tastes like sugar and feels like fire." He leaned his forehead against mine, his breath mingling with mine. "I never thanked you properly. For the gala. For standing up. For being brave enough to hit a king." I laughed, a breathless sound, and reached up to trace the straight line of his nose, the one that had healed perfectly, leaving him more handsome than any man had a right to be. "You deserved it," I whispered, and my fingers lingering on his skin. "You were being an arrogant ass." "I was," he agreed, turning his head to kiss my palm, his lips lingering on the pulse point of my wrist. Then he looked up, his eyes dancing with mischief. He leaned forward and pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to the tip of my nose. "Best punch I ever took." I smiled, grabbing his silk tie and pulling him down until our lips were a breath apart. "Shut up and eat your cupcake, Your Majesty." And just like that, the Alpha King finally got his baker. From a broken nose to a healed heart. I hope you're smiling as much as I am right now. If Damon and Mina's story stole a piece of your heart today, please leave a like. It helps our library grow more than you know. And to make sure you don't miss the next mate claim, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. And I want to hear from you down in the comments. What was the moment that hooked you? Was it the punch, the library scene, or that final cupcake? Let me know your favorite part and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until the next full moon, stay safe and keep your heart open.